Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My topic is design of an experiment. So, design of an experiment is defined as the design of a research experiment. It takes care of planning, conducting, analyzing, and explaining controlled tests to estimate the factors. So, experimental design or design of an experiment, both the terms can be used interchangeably, is a way to carefully plan experiments in advance so that results are both objective and valid. So, these are the steps for conducting a design of experiment. First of all, we have to define the problem. After that, we have to determine the objectives. The purpose of objective is the objective provides the purpose of investigation, and a clearly defined objective direct the researcher into the right direction. After that, we have to brainstorm the objective. Then we have to design the experiment. After the designing of experiment, we have to conduct the experiment and collect the required data. After the collection of data, we have to analyze the data and interpret the results. And finally, verify the predicted results. The most important principle of experimental designs are: one is randomization. It is a random process of assigning treatments to the experimental units. Treatment means that it is an experimental condition, and experiment units are the basic or the smallest division of the experimental material. The random process implies that every possible outcome is possible. The purpose of randomization is to remove bias and other source of extraneous variation. So in randomization, the treatments must be assigned at random to the experimental units. Second principle is replication. It is the repetition of the basic experiment, or it is a complete run for all the treatments to the test, all the treatments to be tested in the experiment. An individual repetition is called a replicate, and a replication is used to secure a more accurate estimate of the experimental error. And it also decreases the experimental error and thereby increase its precision. Third principle is local control. So all the extraneous source of variation we cannot be removed by randomization and replication. So local control which control all the factors except one which we are investigating. A local control referring to the amount of balancing, blocking, and grouping of the experimental units. The main purpose of local control is to increase the efficiency of an experimental design by decreasing the experimental error. Then, sample. Usually, our experimental studies are conducted on samples because it is impossible to study the entire population. A sample refers to the smaller, manageable version of a larger group, and it is the subset containing all the characteristics of the larger population. Samples used when population sizes are too large for the test to include all the possible members or observations. To get an unbiased sample, the selection must be random. This is the process of sampling. A sampling is a process or technique of choosing a subgroup from a population to participate in the study. Individuals are selected in sampling which represent the larger group. Then, these are the steps in sampling process. First step is to identify and define the target population. Second step is selecting the sampling frame. Third step is choosing the sampling method or sampling technique. Fourth step is that to determine the sample size. And fifth step, collect the required data. So, we already said that the first stage in sampling process is to clearly define the target population. Second step is that to select a sampling frame. A sampling frame, which means that it is a list of actual cases from which sample will be drawn. For example, if we considering to take a sample of couples in a society, each and every one of are listed in the sampling frame. The sampling frame must be representative of the population. Third step in sampling process to choose the sampling technique or the sampling method. The sampling technique can be divided into two. One is the probability sampling and another is non-probability sampling. Probability sampling includes simple random, stratified random, systematic random, and clustered random. Non-probability sampling includes conveys judgmental and small sampling. So, probability sampling, every item has a chance of being in number. It has a greatest freedom of bias. In simple random sampling, which means that every case of the population has an equal probability of inclusion in sample. In stratified sampling, the population is divided into strata or subgroups, and random sample is taken from each of the subgroups. It be based on the gender, occupation, or extinction. Stratified sampling is often used where there is a great deal of variation within the population, and it purpose is to ensure that every stratum is adequately represented. In systematic sampling, every nth case after a random start is selected. For example, if you are surveying people of consumers, every fifth consumer may be selected from your sample. The advantage of the sampling technique is its simplicity. In cluster sampling, whole population is divided into clusters or groups, and a random sample is taken from these clusters, all of which are used as a final sample. And this cluster sampling is advantageous for those researchers whose subjects are fragmented over large geographical areas. In non-probability sampling, not all members of the population have an equal chance of being participated in the study. And the researcher selects samples based on the subjective judgment of the researcher rather than a random selection. Convenient sampling is one of the non-probability sampling method. Here we selecting the participants because they are often readily and easily available. It is a favored sampling technique among students as it is inexpensive and an easy option compared to other sampling techniques. For example, if you are using our friends or family as a part of sample, is easier than targeting unknown individuals. Then, purposive sampling or judgmental sampling. Here, we purposefully select the samples. Like particular persons or events are selected deliberately in order to provide important information that cannot be obtained from other choices. It is where the researcher include cases or participants in the sample because they believe that they warrant inclusion, which means that we cannot avoid, the researcher thinks that it cannot be avoided. In snowball sampling, it is a non-random sampling method that uses a few cases to help encourage other cases to part in the study, thereby increasing the sample size. The research participants recruit other participants for the test, where potential participants are hard to find. This approach is most applicable in small populations that are difficult to access due to their closed nature. Example, for secret societies and inaccessible professions like. The fourth step of sampling process is to determine the sample size. Sample size refers to the number of participants or observations included in a study. The number is usually represented by n. And the size of the sample is influenced by two properties. One is the precision of the estimate. Second one is the power. Power means that the probability of finding a statistically significant result. It is the formula for determining the sample size. That is, n is equal to p into 100 minus t into z square by e square. N here, n is the required sample size, p is the percentage of occurrence, and e is the percentage maximum error required, and z is the confidence level. Confidence level means that it is the probability that the value of a parameter falls within a specified range. The fifth step of sampling process is the collection of data. Collection of data means the application of suitable methods for getting the required information from the unit areas under investigation. Main data collection methods are direct personal investigation. Here, we collect data personally. The investigator visits the site, make inquiries, and collect the required data. It is more reliable and unbiased one. The success of this method depends largely on the dedicated involvement of the investigator. Second method is indirect investigation. This method is adopted when the field of study is very vast or the indirect or the direct collection of data not feasible. Indirect investigation includes interviews. In interviews, the information is obtained through inquiries and recorded by enumerators. In structured interviews, which are performed by using survey forms, in the case of open interviews, the notes are taken while talking with the respondents. Open-ended interviews need to be interpreted and analyzed even during the interview. And these interviews are carried out by well-trained observers and enumerators. The second one is questionnaires. Here, the enumerator poses questions directly. The questionnaires refers to forms filled in by respondents alone. It can be handed out or sent by mail. Third one is collection by correspondence. Here, the data are not formally collected by the investigator, but the local agent do the job. Such data is not scientifically reliable. Therefore, this method can be applied only where is a high degree of precision is not necessary. Other main types of data collection include census and sample survey. In census, the data collection is about everyone or everything in a group or a population. It has advantages like accuracy and detail, and also has disadvantages like high cost and time. In sample survey, only one part of the total population is studied and has an advantage of cost and time, but disadvantage at the same time like accuracy and detail. Experimentation. Experimentation is one method of data collection. It offers the possibility of establishing a cause and effective relationship between the variables. An experiment is a contrived, which means it's a controlled or artificially created situation that allows the researcher to manipulate one or more variable, whereas controlling all of the others and measuring the resultant effects. Experiments of two types, which are conducted in laboratory and are executed in natural settings. Experimentation includes some of experimentation is affected some of the factors in the experimentation. One is that placebo effect. Placebo is actually a substance after treatment has no therapeutic value and given clinical trial to test the effectiveness of a treatment. For example, you have a control and a test group. To the control, we are giving placebo, and to the test group, we are giving the actual drug and study their effect. If we find that the two actual drug has no effect on the treatment, and we conclude that both of them have no, the actual drug has no effect on the treatment. And the experimental effect, which influences may have on the either interaction with participants, potential errors of observation, measurement, analysis, or interpretation. The experimental's personal characteristics, attitudes, and expectations directly aware of participants. Method is very effective method. Here, the participants are unaware. The blinding, blinding is a technique used to make the subject blind to which the treatment they have been given. Like double blind, here the participant and the experimenter unaware. A double blind experiment is one which neither the experimenter nor the subject know which treatment they have given. Observation. Observation is another method of data collection. Here, the researcher observes within a specific research field. It is sometimes referred to as an unobtrusive method, which means an unnoticeable or invisible. It may be defined as perceiving data through the senses like sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. Observation may be two types, naturalistic and laboratory observation. In naturalistic observation, we are observing subject in their natural environment. Observations are also influenced by so many factors. One is in observer biasness. It is also called experimental bias or research bias. It is the tendency to see what we expect to see or what we want to see. When a researcher studies a certain group, they usually come to an experiment with prior knowledge and subjective feelings about the group being studied. When a subject knows they are being observed, it can cause them to act differently from how they normally would, which could interfere with the experiment. So, blinded experiments are used to limit observer bias. In one-way mirror, we permit the observer to watch a focus group without the respondent being able to see the observer. Most focus groups are conducted in rooms with one-way mirror and an observation room. Here, respondents are not constantly reminded that they are being watched, although they have to take part with the researcher that they are being observed. In participant observation, the hair of the respondent can be studied by studied. The respondent do not know that they are being observed, so their behavior is not conveyed by the conscious feeling of being observed by the stranger. And here, the observer has a very good understanding with the respondents. In case of laboratory observation, we are observing the subjects are in a controlled environment. Studies are observed like this. A case study which involves a narrow, in-depth, and detailed examination of the particular case or cases. A case study is both the process of learning about the case and the product of our learning. Generally, a case study can highlight nearly any individual, group, organization, event, or belief system action. Ex post facto. Here, ex post facto or after the fact research is a category of research design where investigation starts after it has occurred. It is a kind of study which try to predict the causes on the basis of actions and have already occurred. Here, the researcher cannot manipulate or change the already occurred actions or behavior. The final stage of design of an experiment is interpretation. Interpretation refers to the task of drawing inferences from the collected facts after an analytical or experimental study. It is through interpretation that the researcher can well understand the abstract principle that works beneath his findings. Here, the researcher may seek a guidance from experts for accomplishing the task of interpretation. And deduction, just opposite to interpretation or deduction, it is concerned with deducting hypothesis based on an existing theory. Then designing a research strategy to test that hypothesis. Deductive means reasoning from the particular to the general. In deduction, first of all, we have to deducing a hypothesis from an existing theory. Then formulating a hypothesis. After formulating hypothesis, test that hypothesis and examine the outcome of the test, and finally confirming or rejecting the theory.